G'day, hi, and welcome. Alright, World War III update. Okay, it looks like Israel's getting kind of nervous over there. Netanyahu's made his trip to Moscow, sitting down having a chat with Putin. And Putin's out there pretty much saying that, Israel has nothing to worry about because, Assad's not going to open up a new front on Israel. So the whole thing is this, that why would Israel be worried about Assad attacking Israel anyway? He says basically they're busy defending their own country. But it's very simple why they would be thinking this way, because it's a little bit, I guess, maybe guilt of conscience in my opinion, but maybe some people agree with me, disagree with me, whatever. But Assad knows who exactly started the ISIS guys. They know who funded them. They know, when Assad was out there in his interview there the other day, he was saying, yeah, well, this is a Western creation. And he also, when you say Western creation, you're also saying Israeli creation. Because, I mean, the United States doesn't jump. When the Israelis say jump, the United States says how high, government speaking. I know a lot of my U.S. Listeners won't want to hear that, but they know it. Like Israel has very big control over the U.S. government in a lot of ways, because the neocon Israeli faction in the Congress, right, and in the House and the Senate, it's huge. Even here in Canada, we're kind of a bit of a slave to Israel as well, not to the same degree, but nonetheless, right. So Assad knows for sure that which countries have gotten who arm these proxy groups in the first place. It's going to be a long time before I think Assad gets payback against Israel, but it will come. Now, what I think the Russians, have been doing has made Israel nervous, because they now know they can't touch Assad. They know that, okay, people were saying that Assad was probably going to fall by the end of this year. But with Russian intervention in there, I doubt that's going to happen, right? It might. I mean, one thing you have to factor in is that the Syrian army is a limited amount of troops, right? They are running out. They still have quite a bit, but they're running out. Jihadis are worldwide. They're people. The replenishment rate is by far, you got a couple, maybe 2 billion people that are willing to fight against Assad. So, again, he's got the odds against them, right? But the real thing is it's going to be cutting off the supply lines. Now, Israel's kind of, I guess, maybe doing damage control on this one. I think they know they're beat on this one, and I think the Americans know they're beat on this one, because once again, Putin he's playing this one not because he's a good guy, because he knows how to play it. He's making the United States look bad again, because saying, hey, look, we are going to go in there, we're going to fight ISIS. You guys have been doing airstrikes, but we're going to put boots on the ground. We're going to one-up you, right? And the United States' State Department, and John Kerry out there saying it's a bad idea. You might end up hitting the proxy groups. But people around the world saying, okay, you would rather have the Russians not beat ISIS because you're worried about the jihadi groups that want to overthrow Assad. Removing Assad is more important than beating ISIS. Most people around the world say it's the other way around. Most Europeans will say that. Most Canadians will say that we got to beat ISIS. Never mind overthrowing Assad. Is Assad a dictator? Yes. He's a horrible man. Sure. So is Putin. So is Netanyahu. So is pick one, right? There's no good guys when we're talking governments-wise. Again, governments around the world have failed people. But that said, with the Russians, one of the upper hands they have is that they've pretty much mobilized an entire force, air, land, and sea, and subsurface. They've got everything. They got the submarines there, and if they have the Akula, my speculation is that they're going to have attack submarines protecting that big Akula sub, wherever it might lurk. But the Akula is more of a show of force. But in the base of Tartus, which is a fair-sized base, I guess, it's this only... the Russians only have 2 external naval bases. The one in Crimea at Sevastopol, and the other one in Syria, the base of Tartus. Now, Assad's been, begging Putin, yeah, anytime you want to come and bomb the crap out of these guys, these ISIS guys, come ahead, right? And of course, we know that the CIA is going to be alongside the ISIS guys, basically arming them and training them, etc., etc. So you're gonna have special forces in there. We know about the SAS guys that were captured or shown in there. So we know that there's a good chance that we're going to be hitting a lot of coalition force guys on the ground that most people probably know that their government has sent people but there's probably a good chance the government hasn't told the people yet. So there is boots on the ground, and we know in Iraq, I mean, how many Americans have already been sent back there, just as forward observers. Everybody take off their boots, wear sandals, that way we can't see there's boots on the ground, right? So everybody knows what's going on. But the thing is that the Israelis know that if they strike a Russian target, they're doomed. I mean, the retaliation is going to, Israel, yes, their pilots are phenomenal. Most American flight training is based upon Israeli. The Israelis, wrote their manuals in blood too. So, all the innovations that the Israeli Air Force and stuff like that you know, uh, kind of hunkered down on stuff like using drones. That was the Israelis that first started using that, and they started using it because they were losing too many pilots, and they figured, okay, well, if we could send a drone over with just a little camera, even if it gets shot down, you don't lose the man, right? And it takes 5 years to take bring an Israeli pilot up to scratch. It takes 5 years. That's a lot of training. The Merkava tank that the Israelis have, for example, they learned that building cheap tanks is not worth it because it takes such a long time to replace the tank crew. A tank you can replace, the next day, kind of thing. It depends how fast you build them. But the crew is what, so they learned how to build really good tanks, that type of thing. And the Merkava tank is a pretty damn good tank. But everything has its Achilles heels, and not only that, numbers. The Israelis don't have the numbers of the Russians. And the other thing, the Israelis know that if they're flying in that airspace, okay, they're flying in the umbrella of an S-300 missile system, meaning they may have been able to take out a few Russian S-300 missile systems a few years ago with airstrikes in 2010. A lot of people thought it was a nuke blast. No, that's just how powerful the missiles are. There's a lot of rocket fuel and stuff in there, plus just the warheads. And these systems, they kind of have like multiple warhead or fragmenting warheads, so that when they blow up, it's like a big shotgun blast. You just, if you're within the cover, like I don't know how much of the sky, but these like 30 millimeter tungsten darts, when they fly out, they just fly out like a shotgun blast, and there's no aircraft that's going to withstand that. So it makes it very hard to be able to counter these things when there's also Russian fighter jets flying above them. So you've got to deal with the Russian fighter jets, and then you've got to deal with the Russian missile systems on the ground and the anti-aircraft fire, and et cetera, et cetera. So this will be basically making it impossible to basically attack the Russian or the Assad's forces without mass losses to themselves. And they know that the Russians aren't going to back down at this point. So that said, this also, they've done something a little different. What they've said is, okay, well, we're going to coordinate with you. So what I'm thinking they're going to do is, because, and I'm sure the Russians aren't stupid, they know what's going on. And it kind of seems like this is what has been going on, is that every time a coalition airstrike goes out, it seems to be hitting nothing, abandoned things, abandoned warehouse. It seems like the jihadis seem to be getting, not all of them, but some of them seem to be getting a tip before the airstrike, or the airstrike gets delayed to the point that it gives the guys time to get out of there. U.S. pilots have been noticing this. They're sitting on the ground with their F-18 ready to go, full of bombs, just waiting for the clearance, and they run out of fuel waiting for clearance, then they got to refuel the jet, and then by the time they refuel the jet and they take off, there's nothing there to hit. And they've been noticing this. Now, they're not going to do this for all the jihadis, obviously not. Not every jihadi is going to be in on the deal here, but there's a handful of them that are being, directed by the CIA. Most people around the world have kind of pretty much figured it out by now. You've got something like 70-some-odd% of the Syrian people believe ISIS is a Western creation. But you can, again, you can track it through Jordan, you can track it through United Arab Emirates, you can track it through Saudi Arabia. As who's arming them, you can track it through Turkey, you can track it through Israel. Israel's been treating ISIS fighters in their hospitals, that type of thing. So, or AKA Free Syrian Army, whichever, as soon as they get to the border, just say you're Free Syrian Army instead of ISIS, and the Free Syrian Army is pretty much absorbed by Al-Nusra Front. Now, Al-Nusra Front, let's look at them. At first, those guys were just those were Al-Qaeda backed, and they're complete whack jobs. These are the guys that eat the hearts out of people and stuff like that, and they basically, they cut people's heads off, all this stuff, right? So there's no way these guys are ever going to, be allies of the United States, but these are guys are now allies of this Free Syrian Army, so this is what the CIA is protecting, is Al-Nusra Front and the Free Syrian Army. But again, you might as well say ISIS, Al-Nusra Front, and the Free Syrian Army. Yes, there are some tribal differences between them, But at the ISIS is the ideology, is what they're, it's that one world caliphate, right? And they know that, okay, with the Russians in there, they are going to be striking ISIS targets. And in fact, there's already, I haven't found any footage yet, but I know there's been drones flying around. We know there's jets. Apparently there was some, maybe a frog foot or two may have unloaded some rockets on them, demolition rockets, and them things. They'll incinerate, quite large area. They're quite powerful rockets, and for close support, close attack. A frogfoot's pretty much as badass as it gets. The only thing probably more badass than a frogfoot is an A10. Which, if you're gonna go clear jihadis, that's what you need, is an A10 or a frogfoot. Why? Because you can shoot the crap out of these things, and they're flying tanks. They're not impossible to shoot down, but they're hard enough. But that said, it also makes it harder to shoot down Assad's forces with the Free Syrian Army and ISIS, because the Russians also have jamming equipment there. And we know that the Russians have been putting on a big display of force. They're going to be doing it with Egypt. Egypt is kind of, Egypt is jumping ship on the United States for sure. They're kind of working with the Russians, but not necessarily working with Assad. It's kind of a bizarre thing. Egypt and Syria basically they don't have open government lines to each other, but they are kind of coordinating military. And the United States is even going to have to coordinate with the Russians. And the whole reason why they're going to have to coordinate with the Russians is because if they don't, they're going to get a lot of their own guys killed from Russian airstrikes, because the Russians aren't going to discriminate. Anything that yells Allah Akbar over there, they're going to be shooting at, right? So any black flags they see, they're going to strafe. So I think what the Israelis are doing is saying, well, you coordinate with us and we'll coordinate with you. Now, the Russians are probably not stupid. What they're probably going to do is coordinate, but at the last moment. Why? Because they are going to end up killing a lot of Mossad agents, a lot of CIA agents. They're going to be killing a lot of people, a lot of these jihadi proxy handlers and stuff like that. For sure, there's no doubt. We're never going to hear about it, but there's no other reason why they'd want to coordinate with the Russians. I mean, considering the stiff opposition that, technically consider this the ultimate Russian veto on Syria, right? So it's like, we're going in. They're sending in Tu-22s. They're sending in everything. The Su-34, this electronic warfare aircraft, a hell of a strike aircraft, anti-shipping, anti-anything. You got MiG-31s flying up above for interception. You got MiG-29s, protecting, whatever. You've got close support attack helicopters, tanks. Again, you've got surface-to-air missiles of all types, from the Panzer S-12, which is their newer. I can imagine there'd be all kinds of stuff that they're bringing in, and the Russians have been dumping about 2 shipments a day into Syria, building their forward bases and stuff like that. So I say 6 months down the road, Syria will be known as a new Russia. It's going to probably. I don't think they're going to ever wipe out the jihadis, but they will move them back. Now, this is also where I think Israel is really panicked. Is that, and it's kind of like what I said in a previous video, is that what's going to happen is the Russians are going to strike these guys. Obviously, they're going to back off into Libya. Now, at some point, the Assad and the Russians are going to be going into Libya, and that's going to be payback. That's going to be pretty bloody too. Why? Because that's where they're coming from, right? So they're going to do to them basically what everybody else has been doing to Syria. Nobody asked permission to go bomb the crap out of Syria, but yet everybody's there bombing the crap out of it, having a free-for-all. So I think Libya, my speculation is this, that Libya will probably be the first on Assad's hit list, just because that's where all the jihadis are meeting up, which will force the jihadis only into a few areas. Now, with Lebanon there, with their communist party that's basically going to be supporting Assad, how well Lebanon can do this, I don't know, about being so close to Israel. This is going to make them nervous too. And what Israel is saying, what Netanyahu is saying, is they're worried about ISIS turning on them. And of course they're going to do this because they're going to be fleeing. They can't go into Turkey as much. They can't really go into any of the into Saudi Arabia and all that, even though the Saudis are funding them. So what's going to happen is all these jihadis are going to flee out of Syria. The whole point of the airstrikes was to, we'll call this the world's most extreme cattle herding competition in the world. Basically, see where you could, drop a bomb, move your jihadis, because if they don't move, they're going to get incinerated, right? look at it this way: they were lucky when they were getting barrel bombs dropping on them. Now they've got Russian, Russian Federation forces flying above them. Those bombs are going to be a little bit bigger than the barrel bombs. They're going to be a lot bigger, a lot more powerful, a lot more accurate. And that's also going to lead to a lot more, dead jihadis. Now that said, again, when these jihadis start losing, like a lot of people, they're going to have to back off. Obviously, that or they're going to die. Now, some will probably, again, a lot of these, you have your three types of jihadis. You have your guy that, okay, basically, he's as loyal as you pay him. And we know about the Obama, again, to repeat, but, to keep people informed. We know about the Obama, kind of welfare program with the jihadis getting paid $400 to $700 a week. They're taking, I guess, 1,000 men a week or whatever. These guys get training for a couple of weeks or whatever, and then they just disappear. And what have you. And, billions of dollars into this program, and it's like nobody knows where this money's going. So it's obviously buying the weapons for these jihadis. But that said, there's no oversight of who these guys are. They're all considered, what you call it, sweet, innocent, loyal, Free Syrian Army. These guys just want to overthrow Assad, and they're for the women and children and democracy. Yeah, right. If you can really believe that. No, these are hardcore, psychopathic, nihilistic jihadists, Hail Hydra. These guys, these are the crazies of the crazies. These guys love death. It wouldn't matter if they had nothing to fight over; they'd find something to fight over. So that's one type of guy. The second type of guy is the biblical guy. This is the guy that, all your progressives are out there saying has nothing to do with Islam, but yet, he reads his end of times prophecy, Islamic end times prophecy, and he's seeing it playing out in the Middle East. So he may have been a straight A student. He may have been, a community organizer, a real asset to his community. All of a sudden, prays 5 times a day, doesn't eat meat or drink beer or anything like that. Upstanding citizen, never in trouble with the law, never done drugs, all this stuff. Straight A student gets up and goes, and like 6,000 of them between the United States and Europe and Canada and all those places. A lot of these people, a lot of them, they're not brainwashed or anything. They're looking at the religion and saying, oh, okay, well, this is the end times. I'm going to go meet up with the Al Mahdi, with the riders of Khorasan. So they're believing that part of it. So they're joining up for that reason, right? Because they think it's end times prophecy. And then you have the third one where, again, guy gets up in the morning, the hot Iraqi or Afghani son to go work in the fields all day, and then come back home with his children splattered all over the yard from a drone strike. Well, and then we call him a terrorist when he picks up a firearm to go and get revenge, right? So, and that's how these terrorists typically get bred, is you kill their family members, they tend to get pissed off at you. Find fault with that, right? So those are your three typical types, but the ones that we're dealing with ISIS are typically the mercenary types, who just happen to be joined up by all the others. And then, of course, there's just the plain old tribal wars that's going on there. So you got to understand all that's playing into what's going on. But right now, we know for sure the Russians are backing. It's pretty, and this is not something that they've been doing secretly. They've been waiting a long time to go in. I question why the Russians are doing it now, and they didn't do it, say day 2 after the Syrian uprisings. Or day 1 of this Free Syrian Army. Why didn't they stop it then? So that does kind of, wonder why they waited till now. But the Russians are exploiting this to their advantage, because they know that this ISIS guys are created by the West. And, Assad has said it pretty clearly. Now, maybe you believe Assad, maybe you don't. Some people are even speculating that the Russians have created ISIS, which the Russians have been known to create proxy groups just the same way the United States has done. It's, again, it's dirty. It's dirty no matter how you look at it. But for this typical issue, for Syria, it comes down, again, resources and money. And we know that the United States is in extreme trouble right now. Up here in Canada, for example, we're going through our election too, just the same as the Americans are going, but theirs is a little bit further out than ours. Ours is only 27 days away from making this video, and we'll be voting. Now, Canada in a whole does 80% trade with the United States. Okay, so we're going to take a hit at some point when the United States dollar really implodes. The only thing is that we can free our dollar from the United States at some point. We have our own independent currency, unlike, say, the Greeks with the Eurozone, where they don't have their own currency and they can't devalue. Now, the Canadian dollar is devalued a bit, but it's come up a bit, it goes down a bit, it comes up a bit, goes down a bit. And we got our own resources, we got tons of resources. Yes, okay, the Saudis, are pumping more oil than that's possibly needed, to basically destabilize the Russian economy and the Iranian economy, but and also to undercut the American fracking economy. So the Saudis at some point are going to get thrown under the bridge. If they haven't been already, they're going to be, because they got no friends, right? They're just, enemy my enemy type of thing, right? So what's going to happen now is that whenever things go really awry, and we're seeing, like, even my prime minister's out there talking about it. It's about the very few politicians out there talking about this. It says, look, there's been, crash here, crash in Europe, crash in Asia, crash, here, there, everywhere. And most people in Canada, trust me, are more awake than the number one issue here is the economy. And the reason why it's the number one issue is because people know the whole global economy is fake, fraud, phony, false, and we need to throw the bankers in jail. It's just people don't know how to go about doing it. We need some brave law enforcement to and some prosecutors to actually, become patriotic to the point where, hey, we got to throw these people in jail before they get us all killed. Now, what the bankers are trying to do is get a war going. So Syria probably will be where the war ends, not where it begins, because of what the Russians are doing. The Russians have already called the bluff of the United States on this one. They've called the bluff of Israel on this one. Israel isn't going to do a thing to Assad now. Maybe they're probably still going to do stupid airstrikes in other people's countries like they've always been doing, but now it's going to be a lot more dangerous for them. They're literally backed into their own country because of the air defense systems. And again, what happens when an Israeli pilot gets shot down by, a Russian-made missile? Who's going to really come to the aid of Israel? Is the United States willing to get, half the planet killed in a war with Russia for Israel? That's what it comes down to, right? Now here in Canada, well, we're in on this fight too, and again, no good guys, right? Harper's not a good guy. He's better than probably most, but he's, and I'm not. Trust me, I'm critical of him, but he's better than most. But our country, okay, we got a surplus. Yes, we still have a deficit, no matter what, but we got a balanced budget and a surplus. There's very few other countries on the planet that can say that. Now our surplus is only like 1.3 billion, which if you look at that, it's like not very much for. It's a drop in the bucket, but it's better than a kick in the nuts, right? So, so we're at a spot where when the next economic crisis hits, okay, we're still in better shape. We're in better shape than what we were in 2008. Going into that, and our banking and everything, yes, it's still corrupt like everybody else because we're just doing everything slower. But with what's going on in the States, they can't get a war started, and this is it's the ultimate Russian veto because it can't expand now. The war in Syria cannot expand. It can't go outside Syria. Why? The Russians are in there. They're going to get quarantined to where it is. Doesn't mean Assad won't fall at some point. Doesn't mean it won't even give up. But most people realize that no, we can't really go against the Russians on this because if they're striking ISIS targets, actual ISIS targets, and they're doing it, not from 20,000 feet, but from a couple of hundred feet, and from boots on the ground. There's nobody that's really got a counter argument for that, saying why they shouldn't be in there. And that's going to basically, it exposes what's going on. It exposes the system for what it is. It exposes, the proxy groups, and although they won't talk about it on the mainstream media, I guess it's because they're not allowed to. Remember, the people that own the banks own the media. It's all one system when you really think about it, and it's failing. And again, the Syrians, they're not stupid. They know who's, the bombs are raining down on their heads, but they also know, who armed ISIS in the first place. And again, you can track it. You follow the money, you figure it out. You had George Soros money back the Syrian protests and everything like that, and then you've got Insane McCain that was pretty much take a picture with every of the top Al Qaeda and Al Nusra and Free Syrian Army guys, all the leaders. He calls them all his best friends. So people kind of know, yeah, it's a proxy group. Plus Joe Biden pretty much spilled the beans on that one. So yeah, we've been arming the wrong proxy groups, and this has kind of got out of control. So that said, people are looking on the world. They're seeing, okay, well, Russia's fixing the U.S.'s problem. It becomes a confidence issue too. And again, it's bad for the American people because trust me, the American people don't like their government. They see what's going on. And when Donald Trump's the best you could hope for, the best you could hope for, you know you're in trouble. And I feel bad for my brothers and sisters to the south because again, it's not the American people, it's the governments. But it's the handful of people in the government that are doing this on behalf of the Israeli lobby. And this is the whole thing that, like Obama's a good guy, Obama's a bad guy. No, Obama's just a puppet like George Bush was. In fact, he's been 10 times, he's 10 times, 10 times the George Bush ever was. This guy started more war, has had more people die on his watch than anybody. And people are seeing this. They're saying, okay, well, U.S. foreign policy is the cause of a lot of the problems in the world. Then how it relates to sanctions, how it relates to people not being able to do business because of sanctions. And it's not just the sanctions that are against Russia, for example, hurt Europe. The sanctions against Iran hurt Europe. The trade that was done there. So people are starting to say, look, the global economy is pretty much tanked. And there's very few countries that are sitting in good positions. And now's the time, not the time, to want to follow U.S. foreign policy into the abyss of jihadi. So with all that going on, we're seeing the Russians, really sidestep here, because this is also has a bigger implementation than a lot of people think. Because there's something I said on my global view that the Russians may do, come around on NATO. Well, now they're getting into an area in the world where they can do this, where now they have another staging ground. Once they start stabilizing Syria a bit, they've now have technically Syria as their base, because they're going to be all over it, so right there, they can now stage missiles. They can now stage. This is a hell of a strategic move for the Russians. All they got to do is clear out some jihadis, and they've got themselves, the ability to basically, defend themselves outside their own country. So when you think about it like that, it does, they might make an African end round. Because think about it this way: they start off in Syria. They take Syria. They hold Syria. Well, they basically, what I think they're going to do is let the Free Syrian Army take the positions. But what's been happening with the Free Syrian Army is every time they take a position, they have to move on to another place where the jihadis are, and then they have to give up the position that they were in because they don't have enough manpower. But I think what the Russians are going to do is just basically let the Syrians take the area. They'll hold it until the Syrians come back, and by that time, they'll, again, it'll be like herding cattle. They'll either herd them into Israel, and Israel will have to deal with them, or into Turkey, or into all these other countries that basically don't want them, and they'll have to deal with them. And this is what Israel's very, very terrified of right now. That's what they've been talking about, is that we don't want them attacking us, so we'll coordinate with the Russians. So at this point, they have to kill their own proxies, which is usually the end game. Once the proxy has done what you want them to do, then at that point, yeah, you terminate them. Again, the United States could probably wipe out these jihadis in about 2 weeks if they really wanted to, but they don't want to, because they're trying to overthrow Assad. The world knows this. There's no use sugarcoating it, because that's what it is. Now, if they do make a push into Libya, my thing is they're not going to stop there. They're going to set up shop all over the edge of the Mediterranean there. And at that point, they've just done an end round on Europe. Basically, they'll instead of NATO encircling all of Russia will be then encircling NATO. It's kind of a strange thing, and they have the manpower to do this. That's one of the things you have to factor with the Russians, because all they have to do is make deals with these other broken countries like the Sudan and wherever, Libya, Sudan, everything, Morocco, wherever. All they have to do is make deals with them, and voila, they've got new bases. And not only that, they'll have other staging grounds. So this makes it harder for NATO. Now, would Russia do this? Probably, most likely, yes. We'll have to wait and see what happens. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But if NATO keeps pushing onto their border, of course they're going to respond, right? You look at Henry Kissinger coming out there saying, yes, it's very clear that the United States is provoking Russia. Now, this guy is the douchebag of douchebags. And, when he says that, yes, NATO is purposely provoking Russia. When George Soros says, yes, there might be an exchange between Russia and China, or the United States and China, or with Russia, and basically asking the people of Europe to basically defend Ukraine against the Russians. In other words, asking Europe to go to war for the Ukraine. These guys are in the know. These are the guys that start these things usually. So It's when they tell you that's what's going on, that's pretty much what's going on. So we know that the Russians are being provoked. Again, are the Russians saint the Russian government? No, I don't want to live there. I'd love to visit Moscow someday. Sure, I would also love to visit the Egypt and the Valley of Kings someday too. I'd love to see what some of the old stuff in Syria too. However, I'll tell you this: I'm not going there now. It's too damn dangerous. It's a long time before people will be able to travel around the world. The world is becoming a jihadi, a jihadi hornet's nest all over the Middle East. So what we're going to see, I think, is that the Russians are now going to set up a plan to get people on board so that they can calm things down. Because I don't believe that the Russians are the only ones keeping us out of World War III in the shooting aspect, because we are clearly in World War III economically. The Russians, particularly with the Chinese are pretty much dumped the U.S. dollar. The Russians are making it illegal to do trade in the U.S. dollar in their country. So, what does that tell you, right? And these are all, again, boomerang sanctions. Anything that, the Europeans are saying, hey, look, the Americans are still doing trade with the Russians in some areas, but they're telling us not to do any trade with them at all. So, it's going to break up the European Union, and stuff like that. There's no doubt about that. The other thing to look at, too, is that with the European Union in such shambles, and with the migrant crisis, which is manufactured, don't kid yourself. And some people are saying that the whole reason why they're covering it now, because these migrants have been coming for a while. They're saying the reason why they're doing it now is because the European Union is tanking big time. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But considering all the stock market crashes and all that, it's a good possibility that it is. Everybody on, economically speaking, is looking around the world saying, okay, there's going to be a global reset. The Federal Reserve, when it came out and said, no, we're not going to raise interest rates, like anybody was surprised on that. In fact, they're going to go to negative interest rates, meaning they're going to be charging you to keep your money in the bank. Now, here in Canada, they kind of already do that anyway. You get like service fees, right? I'm not 100% opposed to service fees. And the reason why I'm not 100% opposed to service fees is because banks have to make money in order to be profitable. Where I have the problem with the banks is when they make really bizarre and bad trades and loan money out to people who are high risk, and then when they default, they just keep selling their debt down the road until it creates a bubble and a burst, and then they say, we're too big to fail, so you have to bail us out. Or the new thing is bail-ins. So I'm against that. And most people are. Most people want the bankers in jail. And at some point, they're going to go to jail. Now, in Europe, it's hard to say what's going to happen there, but we know there's culture clashes already starting in Europe, pretty hardcore. People are not happy with the migrant crisis. Nobody wants, I have nothing against the Syrian people, but nobody wants the migrants, right? Turkey don't want to take them. Nobody says anything about that. Saudi Arabia doesn't want to take them. Nobody says anything about that. Israel doesn't want to take them. Jordan doesn't want to take them. UAE doesn't want to take them. So all these countries that don't want to take them, that created the crisis in the first place, or helped to jump in on the bandwagon on the crisis in the first place. People are looking around saying, well, how come we have to take them, right? So you have Hungary shutting their border down, and again, that's not going to work to the advantage of the United States, because people are looking at these migrants and saying the reason why they're here is because of U.S. foreign policy. And it's not just the U.S., but the U.S. is the spearhead, right? So obviously this is going to fall back on the blame of that, but it's also going to all the EU leaders that are saying, well, you guys have to take so many of the migrants, and this country can take less and this country can take more, or whatever. That's going to break up the EU. That's one of the main things about it, is it's designed to break up the EU. Now, why they would be doing this, again, we know about the one world currency and the one world dollar, New World Order stuff. Now, the thing about the New World Order is it's already here. It's been here forever. They're just trying to maintain it, right? It's the hegemony, the Federal Reserve, IMF, Rothschild banking system. Rockefellers, Rothschilds, all those people. And the thing is like the City of London banking system, all these decisions that are made to basically, help the bankers out, but it's hurting the people too much. So people are going to be too fed up. So the best distraction you're going to have is all these migrants coming in, while they're working on Plan B or C or D, or I think they're almost at Plan Z. But they do know, and many analysts have been saying in the States, that with what's going on with the economy in the States, the Federal Reserve is, which is not federal, it's privately owned by the Rothschilds, is out of ammo. It has no more things it can do to kick the can down the road other than just keep printing money. That's all it's got. Problem when you keep printing money is, of course, your money becomes more worthless, right? So inflation will hit. And with the Chinese dumping the U.S. treasuries, there's a lot of Americans out there think that, oh no, China can't do that because we're their number one consumer and stuff like that. No, not necessarily. Europe is a bigger market, and the Chinese are willing to take the hit. Plus, the Chinese basically have been, backing their currency with gold. Plus, they're now, 115 other countries have signed on to the AIIB, which is the, basically the counter to the IMF, right? So, and the IMF won't consider the Chinese currency as a one world reserve currency, or a rival reserve currency until next year. They said they were going to do it this year, but they said no, we'll do it till next year. And right after, the Chinese said, okay, that's fine, we'll get rid of the U.S. treasuries. We don't want them anymore. And we're talking $4 trillion worth of treasuries. The only people that are buying them right now is the U.S. So the U.S., mind you, they can destroy the money to keep inflation low. You can do that, but the problem is they lose hegemony. Meaning, when people are buying things outside the U.S. dollar, they don't have control over it, and that's what China is offering, and that's what people are joining up to. And that's also why we're at war with the Chinese, is because it's an economic war first. It goes currency war, trade war, shooting war. And of course, Japan is out there basically saying, okay, well, and they had a big fist fight in their parliament or whatever, or their government building, over changing their military doctrine. Basically, they can now kind of go into an aggressive mode and basically go and follow NATO around or whatever. So they can now go and invade other countries and stuff like that, like the United States. I don't think Japan's going to do that anytime soon, but it's basically the preparation for war is what it is. And with that said, it's, the Japanese people are not happy about this. They've got enough problems on their hands as it is. They've got a horrible economy. They've got Fukushima to still deal with. They've got an erupting volcano to deal with, and on top of that, their government wants them to be able to go to war anywhere around the world and start participating in all these, peacekeeping. Well, they're no longer peacekeeping missions, but these aggressive missions. Japanese people don't like this, but again, the timing. This is all because of a collapsing dollar. It is getting pretty bad, and it is getting pretty exposed. But the Syrian move by the Russians is really kind of something that the reason why it will de-escalate a war is simply due to the fact that it will protect Iran. And the reason why that does, it changes it so that the whole plan to take out Iran, okay, Syria was supposed to be the airstrip for this, right? And because of that, there's no way that with the Russians in there that they're ever going to take out Assad, as a governing power. The jihadis can come, but they're going to be killed left, right, and center. So either you think the jihadis are going to quit, or B, the jihadis are just going to turn their anger at the nearest neighboring country, which will probably most likely be all the other countries around it, such as Israel. And we know that the ISIS guys have made comments such as, when we're done with Assad, we're going to go to Israel. But if they can't make any headway anymore with Assad, they're simply just going to go after Israel. And Israel knows this. So their own proxy is going to backfire them. So they have to now coordinate with the Russians to make sure that they can keep them off their borders. Blowback's a bitch, right? So we're going to have to watch and see what happens in Syria. Again, I haven't seen too much footage, but I've seen a few pictures and stuff like that. And I know there's drones that have been flying around, but apparently they say the Russians have already started to attack the Free Syrian, well, I guess the ISIS guys or Free Syrian Army. To them, they're not going to distinguish which proxy group it is. Either they're fighting with the Assad army or they're not, right? So that's the Syrian army is basically, they'll guide the Russians to, and they're the best army there to do the fighting anyway, because they understand the dialect, they understand who's who, they know where the tribal lines are, they know where the ISIS guys are, where they're in, and they're close, they're perched. You'll have the Syrian army basically 2 blocks away from a whole faction of ISIS jihadis. But the area is so infested that you can't get in there without heavy support. So just to hold the area is almost impossible, right? But with the Russians, like I say, the Syrian army can move forward. Give them 1,000 T-55 tanks, even if you lose half of them. By the time they're done, the country's completely cleansed. So it's going to be pretty genocidal no matter what. So I don't know what else I can really add to it. I probably repeated myself more than I should have, but we see what's happening. We see the picture painting, but this is actually not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's more of one of those kind of we got to think where the next pawn's going to go. This really does throw a monkey wrench into the plans of overthrowing Assad, and if you can't overthrow Assad, you can't overthrow Iran. And that's all Israel cares about, is overthrowing Iran. They don't care how many people they kill to overthrow Iran. And we know that a lot of the people in the U.S. Congress are the same. They're neocons. All they love is death and war, and particularly in the name of Israel. So if it sounds like I'm picking on Israel, yes, I'm picking on the Israeli government, not the people, because again, the people are just the people. They don't really have the control over their government, like the same way the Americans don't have American people don't have the control over their government. And not only that, same here in Canada, we don't have control over our government. So it's pretty clear that the government, these are war against governments. The people are the pawns in between. But the thing is the Russians what they're doing is basically a veto on Syria, meaning no, you can't overthrow Assad, because they want those pipelines, gas pipelines going from Turkey which Turkey started building pipelines with Gazprom there from Russia. The deal was kind of funky. Who knows which way Turkey will really go? But I think at the end of the day, Turkey's going to, again, they're too close to Russia to really be playing that kind of game. It is what it is. Yes, the Turkish government doesn't like the Assad government, but that's a whole different story right there. If they're smart, they'll go along to get along, and they'll prosper even more in the region anyway, because when the gas pipelines go through Turkey, from Russia to Turkey to Syria to Iran, and then probably they'll have to negotiate with Pakistan. Then from Pakistan, will then probably I don't think it'd be too hard for the Pakistanis to side with the Iranians and the Russians. I don't know if they necessarily like each other, but most of the countries in the region hate each other. But just to get, if they say these pipelines are really meant to get to China, and when they get to China, we all prosper, and that's true, because think about it, it'll be completely independent gas system that goes there. The Chinese will buy it all. And that's good business for the region, which means prosperity for the region, which means prosperity for the region is a threat to Israel. That's the way the Israeli government is looking at it, because when the Iranians are going to start having money, and right now the Iranians have nothing, but they have resources, and if they can get those resources to market, they're going to be able to keep going on their weapons, their own weapons group, and their own weapons programs and stuff like that. So yes, this does threaten Israel in that sense, but if Israel again wasn't bombing everybody out every second day, they make their own trouble too, So you can't say that Hezbollah is any better than the Mossad, or Mossad is any better than Hezbollah. They're both terrorist organizations. Yeah, one's disguised as an intelligence agency, but at the end of the day, they're all just terrorist organizations that want to kill people, right? So it is what it is. But at the end of the day, I think the Iranians are going to, again, they know that the United States wants to go to war with them no matter what. But with Russia, sitting in the neighboring country, backing their allies, again, it's going to make it hard to go to war with Iran. And that's what this is really, what the veto is really about. This is why Russia's in there. So they're saving Assad, but in the process, they're saving Iran. So again, it's a big joint effort, right? So I guess I'm going to leave it at about that. I know there's other things I can go on about, and again, I know there's a lot of people that listen to the channel, and they think I pick on their country and stuff. But right now, it's all the countries. Like all our countries are doing, the leaders in all the countries are doing really bad things. So I'm not picking on the people of the country. I know most of the people don't approve of the governments that they have, because it's just it's counter to human nature to be this much of a douchebag and want everybody dead all the time. But we do have to understand this is the world we live in, and we do have to discuss it openly, but we also have to discuss it truthfully as much as we can. I can't always get everything right. I get that, but most of the things, again, it's hard to prove me wrong on. So, and I think the rest of the world's waking up to it. Well, they're not waking up to it. They know what's going on. They just don't know how to deal with it. And with that said, once I think the way the Russians are dealing with this is by doing this Trump move that it kind of slows down that engagement of war with Iran, and because they know as soon as Iran falls, once the United States goes to war with Iran, which is inevitable at some point, after that comes Russia and China. They know that that's the next one, unless the Russians and the Chinese, which are too smart to do it, strike the United States first. Then okay, yeah, that's what the United States wants. Paul Craig Roberts was talking about this. So is Strauss, Steve Buscenic, all these guys. These guys are all really connected in government and stuff like that, and they say it very well. It's like the idea of U.S. foreign policy is to create so much hatred for the United States and Israel that they'll always have an enemy to fight, which obviously, if your war is a racket, you have an military-industrial complex. You need enemies. It's the same. Having Russia as an enemy makes NATO relative. Doesn't mean the Russians are saints. Doesn't mean they don't do bad things around the world either. But of course they do. And again, the government, not the people. At the end of the day, I think people, they've had enough of this stuff. They really have. But the fallout from this is going to be pretty bad as well. Again, the migrant crisis in Europe is going to lead to the biggest human culture clash in history. It's already starting. You can clearly see it, but it is going to get very bloody in Europe. Europe is going to be torn apart by many jihadis. There's no doubt about that, because 72% of the refugees coming in, not all of them Syrian, but they're all a lot of them are young men of fighting age. So, if the Russians are coming in to Syria, or are in Syria, a lot of these jihadis are going to be fleeing out of Syria. Again, cattle herding. They're rustling the Russians are rustling the cattle out of Syria, and NATO and the coalition forces are trying to rustle the cattle into Syria, which is cattle being ISIS and jihadi groups. So as you see the migrant crisis get worse, what you really have to ask yourself, and we're already seeing a couple incidents of we can't really call them jihadis yet, but a few incidents. One guy got shot so far, I think in Sweden or whatever. Was basically challenging a female cop or whatever. Again, we're going to see it. So just be safe out there. That's all I got to say. I guess that's about it. So anyway, next to that, if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation to the channel. Thank you so much to everybody who has. Rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourselves, be true to others. Always do the right thing, and have yourselves a great day. G'day, hi, and welcome. Alright, World War III update. Okay, it looks like Israel's getting kind of nervous over there. Netanyahu's made his trip to Moscow, sitting down having a chat with Putin. And Putin's out there pretty much saying that, Israel has nothing to worry about because, Assad's not going to open up a new front on Israel. So the whole thing is this, that why would Israel be worried about Assad attacking Israel anyway? He says basically they're busy defending their own country, but it's very simple why they would be thinking this way, because it's a little bit, I guess, maybe guilt of conscience in my opinion, but maybe some people agree with me, disagree with me, whatever. But Assad knows who exactly started the ISIS guys. They know who funded them. They know, when Assad was out there in his interview there the other day, he was saying, yeah, well, this is a Western creation. And he also, when you say Western creation, you're also saying Israeli creation. Because, the United States doesn't jump, when the Israelis say jump, the United States says how high, government speaking. I know a lot of my U.S. Listeners won't want to hear that, but they know it. Like Israel has a very big control over the U.S. government in a lot of ways, because the neocon Israeli faction in the Congress, right, and in the House and the Senate, it's huge. Even here in Canada, we're kind of a bit of a slave to Israel as well, not to the same degree, but nonetheless, right. So Assad knows for sure that which countries have gotten who arm these proxy groups in the first place. It's going to be a long time before I think Assad gets payback against Israel, but it will come. Now, what I think the Russians, have been doing has made Israel nervous because they now know they can't touch Assad. They know that, okay, people were saying that Assad was probably going to fall by the end of this year. But with Russian intervention in there, I doubt that's going to happen, right? It might. It might. I mean, one thing you have to factor in is that the Syrian army is a limited amount of troops, right? They are running out. They still have quite a bit, but they're running out. Jihadis are worldwide. They're people. The replenishment rate is by far, you got a couple, maybe 2 billion people that are willing to fight against Assad. So, again, he's got the odds against them, right? But the real thing is it's going to be cutting off the supply lines. Now, Israel's kind of, I guess, maybe doing damage control on this one. I think they know they're beat on this one, and I think the Americans know they're beat on this one because once again, Putin he's playing this one not because he's a good guy, because he knows how to play it. He's making the United States look bad again because saying, hey, look, we are going to go in there. We're going to fight ISIS. You guys have been doing airstrikes, but we're going to put boots on the ground. We're going to one-up you, right? And the United States' State Department, and John Kerry out there saying it's a bad idea. You might end up hitting the proxy groups. But people around the world saying, okay, you would rather have the Russians not beat ISIS because you're worried about the jihadi groups that want to overthrow Assad. Removing Assad is more important than beating ISIS. Most people around the world say it's the other way around. Most Europeans will say that. Most Canadians will say that we got to beat ISIS. Never mind overthrowing Assad. Is Assad a dictator? Yes. He's a horrible man. Sure. So is Putin. So is Netanyahu. So is pick one, right? There's no good guys when we're talking governments-wise. Again, governments around the world have failed people. But that said, with the Russians, one of the upper hands they have is that they've pretty much mobilized an entire force, air, land, and sea, and subsurface. They've got everything. They got the submarines there, and if they have the Akula, my speculation is that of course they're going to have attack submarines protecting that big Akula sub, wherever it might lurk. But the Akula is more of a show of force. But in the base of Tartus, which is a fair-sized base, I guess, it's this only... the Russians only have 2 external naval bases. The one in Crimea at Sevastopol, and the other one in Syria, the base of Tartus. Now, Assad's been, begging Putin to, anytime you want to come and bomb the crap out of these guys, these ISIS guys, come ahead, right? And of course, we know that the CIA is going to be alongside the ISIS guys, basically arming them and training them, etc., etc. So you're gonna have special forces in there. We know about the SAS guys that were captured or shown in there. So we know that there's a good chance that we're going to be hitting a lot of coalition force guys on the ground. That most people probably know that their government has sent people, but there's probably a good chance the government hasn't told the people yet. So there is boots on the ground, and we know in Iraq, I mean, how many Americans have already been sent back there, just as forward observers. Everybody take off their boots, wear sandals, that way we can't see there's boots on the ground, right? So everybody knows what's going on. But the thing is that the Israelis know that if they strike a Russian target, they're doomed. I mean, the retaliation is going to, Israel, yes, their pilots are phenomenal. Most American flight training is based upon Israeli. The Israelis, wrote their manuals in blood too. So, all the innovations that the Israeli Air Force and stuff like that is, kind of hunkered down on stuff like using drones. That was the Israelis that first started using that, and they started using it because they were losing too many pilots, and they figured, okay, well, if we could send a drone over with just a little camera, even if it gets shot down, you don't lose the man, right? And it takes 5 years to take bring an Israeli pilot up to scratch. It takes 5 years. That's a lot of training. The Merkava tank that the Israelis have, for example, they learned that building cheap tanks is not worth it because it takes such a long time to replace the tank crew. A tank you can replace, the next day, kind of thing. It depends how fast you build them. But the crew is what, so they learned how to build really good tanks, that type of thing. And the Merkava tank is a pretty damn good tank. But everything has its Achilles heels, and not only that, numbers. The Israelis don't have the numbers of the Russians. And the other thing, the Israelis know that if they're flying in that airspace, okay, they're flying in the umbrella of an S-300 missile system, meaning they may have been able to take out a few Russian S-300 missile systems a few years ago with airstrikes in 2010. A lot of people thought it was a nuke blast. No, that's just how powerful the missiles are. There's a lot of rocket fuel and stuff in there, plus just the warheads. And the